These 6 simple tips will boost your performance and turn you into a real pawn star. Imagine that you're playing this game as white and your opponent goes pawn f6, attacking your pawn in the center of the board. How do you play here as white? A lot of players in such positions decide that the easiest way to solve the problem is just to trade off this pawn, because we're just trading a pawn for a pawn, so what's the problem with that? It is an equal trade. But the reality is that is a bad trade, which brings us to the first rule: avoid bad trades. Now, pawns are not really equal. There are 2 particular factors that make one pawn stronger, more valuable than the other pawn. So the first factor is if the pawn is in the center of the board, and we're talking about these 4 squares primarily, right? So right here, we've got this pawn in the center of the board, and this pawn is not. Therefore, this trade already favors black. Because think about this. This pawn on e5 is an advanced pawn. It's in the middle of the board, and it is advanced. Therefore, it suppresses your opponent, making it harder for your opponent to develop normally. But when you trade it off, you make it easier for your opponent to move around, because now all these squares are easily available for his pieces however he wishes to develop them. Alright, and the second thing besides being in the middle of the board is also being more advanced. So think about this. Our pawn on e5 is on the 5th rank, and we're trading it for a pawn which is on the 3rd rank if we look at the position from the black perspective. Therefore, our pawn is definitely more advanced, and therefore, once again, it puts more pressure onto the opponent. And therefore, trading a more advanced pawn for a less advanced pawn is again a good thing for black. Therefore, this pawn on e5 is better because it's more advanced and it is centralized. And therefore, we do not want to trade it off. Moreover, if you trade it off, you waste a move to help your opponent either to develop a knight or to open up a bishop, which is good for black either way, but in both cases, you wasted a move just to help your opponent. Moving on to the next item, there are 3 main purposes of pawn moves in an opening. Understanding that makes it very easy for you to understand how to play any opening properly. In this position, black moved his pawn to h6, probably trying to stop white from going knight g5 and attacking the square on f7. Anyway, let's think about this move, pawn to h6. Do you think it's a good move, a bad move, or just an okay move? It is hard to answer that without having particular guidelines, and luckily we do have them. Now, let's talk about this move. Does it help black to develop pieces? No. Does it help black to control the center in the middle of the board? No. Does it help black to attack? No. Therefore, the move that initially seemed like an okay and meaningful move turned out to be a bad mistake. And no wonder that white managed to win the game real quick with this little combo. And again, this combo seems like something sudden that just came out of nowhere, but in reality, it is a logical punishment for black playing a bad mistake. Moreover, you can understand entire opening systems based on the same principle. Think about this. Black played pawn to f5, known as the Rousseau Gambit. And if you've been following this channel for a while, then you know that this is fire. Anyway, let's evaluate this move objectively. What do you think about this? Is it a good one, a bad one, or an average? Well, let's apply the same system. Does it help black to develop his pieces? Unfortunately not. Does it help black to control the center? Absolutely, we're attacking the central pawn. Does it help black to attack in general? Definitely, we're putting strong pressure right from the get-go. Therefore, this move, even though it has certain advantages and it's an aggressive idea, but objectively speaking, it is also not the best move and a little bit risky one because you're ignoring development, at least temporarily. Let's talk about the pawn structure in the London system. Now, let's apply the same criteria. So first off, if we think about white's pawn structure, those pawn moves that white played, did it support white's development? Yes, we can see that white developed his pieces quite comfortably, he's ready to castle, everything's good here. How about control in the center? Well, we've got this pawn, but white could do better because, for example, comparing to black, we can see that black's got 2 pawns that put some pressure to the middle of the board, while white has only 1. Therefore, it's okay, not great. Now, how about attacking? Well, our pawns are quite close to our own territory. White was not trying to really advance them and put pressure onto the opponent, and most of our pawns and pieces as well, they're standing here within our own territory, not even trying to move forward and create threats. Therefore, it's rather bad for that component. In total, we can say that it's a playable and solid opening, but not the best one. Moving a pawn is like texting too fast. Once it's out there, you cannot take it back. Bonk. In this position, white was annoyed by black's advanced knight and decided to kick it out by playing pawn to f3. However, what white overlooked is that this move weakens certain squares around, which are no longer controlled by the pawn, and therefore black could play knight f3 and win the game. In this position, black decided to get rid of this pin and tried to chase the bishop back. On the next move, they expected the bishop to retreat, however, white followed our next rule. If your opponent's king is in the middle of the board, then open up the position. That's how white came to this very counterintuitive move, pawn to f4, with the idea to blow up the center and get to the black position so that you can directly attack the king and everything. Black still tried to keep the position locked, however, white sacrificed the rook and got to his desired outcome, where now the position is open, so as black's king. Now this knight on f6 is absolutely pinned all over the place. Black decided to castle, trying to somehow at least bring his king to safety, but now bishop takes f6 hits the queen, and on the next turn, white found an interesting way to fianchetto his queen. Once you've already castled, the next helpful idea is to make an escape square, a flight square for your king to avoid back rank problems. In this position, black did not play this move, and white decided to take advantage of that by playing rook takes d2, sacrificing the rook. He was hoping for black to accept the sacrifice, which would lead to a checkmate of black king. However, instead, black all of a sudden used sandwich tactic and played queen d1, which is also known as X-ray, and after this trade, he actually checkmated white because white lacked that escape square for his king. If your opponent survived after previous tactics, you can knock him out with a hook. Here's how it works. Here we have opposite side castling, and both sides naturally try to attack each other. Black starts pushing his pawns forward, hoping to attack the white king and open up the position of the queen side. White is trying to do the same. So who's going to be first? Let's have a look. Black goes a4, plays h5, and here is the point. We use this advanced pawn as a hook, as a weakness that we use to open up the position and to actually get to the king. Now, even though black has two pawns in the attack, seemingly more effective compared to white's single pawn, but in reality, white is way ahead, because if black pushes this pawn like this, you can just keep the position closed this way. So the advantage is we've got these pawns which are intact, there are no weaknesses, and that is why it is harder for black to do anything against them. So if he pushes this pawn forward, then after this trade, you can play a3 and still keep the position perfectly locked on the queen side, whereas your attack just keeps going and there is no easy solution for black, or rather no solution at all. If black ever captures this pawn, then you can sacrifice the rook and then get to the king and checkmate it. And if you want to know how to crush your opponents with my favorite aggressive opening for white, check it out right there.